Right, morning guys. Thank you very much for agreeing to chat to me this morning. For everyone watching, we've got Tom and James here from the Tempest Two, and I won't go into who the Tempest Two are right now because that'll cut away at least half hour of this conversation. So obviously with the 101st, what we're looking at doing is using the power of incredible real life experiences to drive change, and looking at the stories behind why people do what they do and how they've ended up where they've ended up. So I suppose a really easy place to start, and the most obvious place to start, would be actually learning a bit more about your story. So how the Tempest 2 came about, what was the thinking behind it, and kind of your stories up to that point. And I'll let either of you take charge of that.
Go for it, Tom. You've got the glamorous, the kick-off, the reason it began, really.
Yeah, the reason it began, I wish there was some romantic story of adventure around it, but essentially, like a lot of great ideas, it started in a pub. I was in the Dickens Inn in St Katharine's Dock in East London, and I was at an event called the Clipper World Yacht Race. Some of you may have heard of it, but it's essentially a circumnavigational yacht race around the world, and civilians could enter. And I was there because my mum had entered. She had actually raced from London to Rio across the Atlantic. And I was stood at the bar and had kind of this profound moment that my mum was officially cooler than I was. And to give you a bit of background on James and I, we met working for Red Bull about 10 years ago. So we were already friends. James was at a birthday party somewhere else. And I'd had enough drinks to Google biggest adventures in the world. And you had your Everest, you had your North Poles, your Sahara deserts, all these kind of big flagship ones. And then somewhere on page 3 of Google, there was this ocean rowing. And I suddenly thought to myself, right, my mum's sailed it. I now have to go and row it. So I text James then and there. We've still got the text messages. It was slightly kind of drunken bravado. But we signed it off then and there. We then told everyone around us that we're now legendary explorers and adventurers of the sea. And we woke up the next morning with that kind of, that dread that we told everyone something and we now had to go and do it. And that's literally where the Tempest 2 was born. And I mean, over those 18 months, mate, we had to learn how to row. We had to figure out how to navigate at sea. We'd never done anything. We had never even run a half marathon, let alone go and row 3,000 miles across an ocean. So when we say we started from scratch, we literally did. And, I think the big thing we took away from when we told people about it was the consistent response was we couldn't do it. We shouldn't do it. We weren't capable. It was dangerous. And I think one thing we took from that was, rather than let that kind of affect our decision and maybe doubt ourselves, we used it as a bit of a fire, really, and a catalyst to push forward for those 18 months and get to the start line. But that was the beginning of 4.5 years ago of the Tempest 2.
So it wasn't even like you were having a beer together. It was just 2 separate beers. And for those of you watching, I have actually seen the text messages as well. So there's no word of a lie. It was literally a text across. So obviously, you guys have gone on, and we'll go into more detail about, you climbed El Capitan, the ultra triathlon through Patagonia, and obviously the Atlantic Road being the first one. So that's, as you say, quite a big task. As you say, you neither of you ever rode before. You say, I've not really done anything like this. So that conversation then the next morning, so obviously you told loads of people when you've had a few beers, there's that level of accountability, but 99.9% of the population, even with that level of, I'm going to let a few people down here, or I'm going to look like a bit of an idiot, probably still would have gone, actually, that's maybe too big of an ask. I'm going to go back to my day job. So you're that 0.1% that decided just to, we got to do this now. So I'm assuming quite soon after you called it a day at your respective jobs, and then you got down to, right, how do we actually start to figure out what the hell we're doing?
So, yes, so I guess, I don't know what it is actually, because, we were just like everyone else. We would really have not a huge issue with telling people big plans and then not doing it. Something was enough of a spark. I think it was the reaction we got when we told people. It was like literally like laughing in our face, which is totally fair enough because of our lack of experience, but it was enough of a spark to at least like open the door on it and then see like down the rabbit hole and yeah, the rest is history. But we actually stayed working in our jobs. So yeah, we met working at Red Bull doing marketing, went kind of separate ways. I was working for a beverage brand in London, and Tommy was working for an agency. And we kept those jobs and just did the kind of rowing prep, which was raising all the money, like working with the charities, all the training stuff, whilst we had these full-time jobs. So it was, knackering, and we were probably being a little bit sly and booking meeting rooms out to make calls to potential sponsors and stuff. But it wasn't actually until we were halfway across the Atlantic. So by this point, we'd raised all the money, which was a massive challenge in itself. And we'd gone through a couple of big kind of fiascos and tests on the row to go, you know what, if we've raised this amount of money and done all this with a full-time job, put ourselves in this crazy situation, what can we do if all of our energy goes into this sort of thing? And it was kind of at that sort of point that I think the switch really went, that, let's try and, as stupid as it sounds, be professional adventurous.
Just as a little point, side note, in terms of actually, so did you have to book holiday to do the row?
Essentially got sabbaticals, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so I got 3 months sabbatical, and
so you go in and say, can we get sabbatical? Why? What are you doing? Oh, we're just going to go row the Atlantic.
Yeah, they didn't believe it. They definitely didn't believe it.
Yeah. And that's why they were so good about it, wasn't it? Because they were like, it's never going to happen.
I got a promotion at sea. I got an email.
I don't know if that says a lot about how good you were when you're actually at the office.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the pay rise was about 40 quid a year, but I still got
So going back to then, before the actual row took place. So, what was the process of actually figuring out? Because as you say, neither you two had even rowed before, let alone row the Atlantic. So, in terms of figuring out, okay, how do we actually start to train for this thing? Even in terms of, because rowing is surprisingly quite a technical thing to do. So what was the process of actually figuring out, okay, one, where do we start? How do we do it? And then who do we get to help us?
Yeah, I think the process was relatively simple. I think we get asked quite a lot, like, what's the most useful tool that you have when you're planning adventures and stuff. And we live in an age now where it's never been easier to learn about stuff. And I think Google is probably our biggest tool that we use. We Googled Atlantic rowing or ocean rowing, and we found certain people. And then from that point on, one thing we're very, very good at, we're very bad at a lot of things in terms of we have no real skill set to call upon. But one thing we're very good at is understanding that we're not very good at stuff, so we act like a sponge. So we essentially try and surround ourselves with the best possible people, the kind of the top in their field or experts in whatever niche we're going into, and we just listen and absorb and learn from them. And we did that with the row. We obviously the group of people who have rowed oceans is absolutely tiny. I think we were still in the first 1,000 people in history to ever attempt it.
Wow.
So the pool of talent is pretty small, but a lot of them are based in the UK. The UK, like a lot of adventure, is kind of the pioneers of ocean rowing. And so we went about our business, finding the boat builder, learning all the little kind of things that you should do on the boat, what you should take, what you should leave at home, how you should train. Yeah. And I think as we kind of evolved through that journey, we thought essentially, right, you need to get big and strong and heavy because you're going to lose weight. So we worked on the t-shirt muscles for a while, got injured, sat on kind of ergs for hours on end. And then someone was like, how do you think sitting on an indoor row machine is replicable to being on the ocean? Because we'd never been on the boat before, because we had to save up to buy the boat. And then when we finally went out on a rowing boat, no oar stroke is just a backward forward. Yeah. It's literally, you're all over the shop. So then it was actually, right, let's work on flexibility and just injury prevention. Let's just put ourselves in the best position to actually last the 2 months rather than building ourselves for power and speed, which is totally irrelevant. So it was a real kind of learning process, how to learn for that trip. But I won't lie, we kind of blagged our way through it. We bootstrapped it. We raised the last 20 grand a day before getting to Gran Canaria. Like, it was proper, almost like how a startup operates. We were just asking favors left, right and center and just trying to get our way through it, because I think for us, what we're really proud of is we were speaking to a lot of other people who were entering an organised race which goes across the Atlantic. It's probably worth mentioning we entered that race because we thought that was the only way to do it. You have the safety net of support vessels which kind of shadow the fleet of boats. And we backed out of that race because we didn't like how it was being handled with the ownership of content, and it would have blocked a few sponsors. And we dropped out and decided to do it completely on our own, which, much to the kind of panic of our family and friends, was the best decision we ever made.
Yeah.
And because it gave us total control over what we wanted to do and how we wanted to approach it. And by doing that, I think, we put all of the responsibility on ourselves, and I can guarantee we wouldn't be sat here speaking to you today unless we made that decision to go and do it on our own. But yeah, the process was pretty interesting, and we just learned as we went, both in the kind of the pre kind of setup of the road, but then also whilst we were on the ocean.
I think that's part of what, because I think a lot of people that sign up for big things and then have an initial bump of like motivation and determination, and then it dies off, when training gets pretty shit and it's raining or whatever it is, there's always excuses. But as soon as we went down that rabbit hole of ocean rowing, speaking to the right people, as you said, Tom, and it was like fascinating. And because the learning curve was so steep, it was like really motivating to like keep going, especially when we had this kind of big goal. And I think that was part of the motivating factor that kept us like really going for those 18 months, raising that money and all the training. And the next thing we know, kind of it went so quickly, we were just pushing off Gran Canaria, and it was like, whoa.
so even to that point, before you've even even before you got to Gran Canaria, that's already a huge journey by the sounds of it for both you in terms of learning, as you said, but even in terms of mindset. So Tom, you said there, you both have this ability to know what you're good at and what you're bad at. But in my experience from playing rugby and then kind of in the real world, it's a really important thing to be able to do, but it's equally a very difficult thing. So it's a very self-reflective, be able to stand back and go, actually, I'm pretty useless at this. I need to go and ask someone for help, or I need to learn. Was that something, James, do you reckon that you both kind of had within you before this, and then this kind of brought it out, or was that a learning from doing this?
I think, I guess can't really speak to other parts of our life, because I'm sure there's things that we think we're good at and know a lot about. But in terms of in terms of something as like specific as Atlantic rowing, we were both aware from the beginning, and I think we get asked quite a lot about that. Why was we never had a falling out and on the boat and this high pressure situation, and we kind of put that down to kind of what you're saying. We're both almost blessed with this sense of naivety and this joint understanding that we didn't know what we were doing. Whereas if one of us had an expectation or an ego of what we thought we knew, that's always where kind of friction starts, is these opposing views. And we were joint in this. We both come from exactly the same point of knowing nothing. Let's try and get through this together. So I think it specifically for the row, but it's kind of stuck with us for every adventure we've done since, is that really treated us well, having that approach of we don't know nothing, but act like we know nothing, and really try and learn from the best people and take bits from everyone. And that's been kind of more and more important with the stuff that we've done since as well, and I guess none more so than the more recent one of LCAP.
So I mean, it sounds like kind of through that journey of preparing and training and learning, there wasn't a huge amount of Christ, maybe we've bitten off more than we can chew. And I'll back that up by saying, obviously, within that process, you came and spent the day with us when I was playing at Sarries. And when through the link of obviously through Duncan Taylor, and I remember when he told us you guys were coming in, I'll be honest, I was expecting kind of two big burly rowers,
That's what you got.
You said the words right out of my mouth. But even then, when we sat down and had a chat with you, and you came in the gym, and boys were asking questions, there was never any kind of inclination really that you were necessarily. Obviously, there was a sense of anticipation, but there was never any open doubt or going, oh, we might be able to have this. Yeah, there's a really nice confidence, I suppose, between you. And I imagine that equally comes to the fact that, as you said, you were good mates anyway. You both are at the exact same starting level going into it, and you're both learning it at the same rate. So you go through that journey of learning, training, figuring stuff out, and you get to Gran Canaria, which is where you launch from. When you get to Gran Canaria, I imagine it suddenly becomes quite real, you know, what you're about to do. So talk us through that process of kind of landing Gran Canaria and then setting off, because there was a few issues even in that small part of the journey.
Yeah, Gran Canaria was an absolute mess, to be honest. We, as I kind of said earlier, we like raised the last bit of money like very, very late. We got the boat out there. We were obviously in this harbour like on our own, the only ocean rowing boat there. So you lack the infrastructure of like an organised event where there's mechanics and stuff. And you know, I left our like satellite box at home, so I had to fly a mate out to come and bring it out the day before. We, due to the last minute sponsor, which was Dropbox, one of our conditions for bringing Dropbox on was we're going to be the first people ever to send, you know, videos and photos back to our sponsors via the cloud from the middle of the Atlantic.
Okay.
To do that, you need one of those massive mushroom dishes you see on like super yachts. So we bought one of those, took it out with us in a big box, and then had to fit it onto this 7-meter rowing boat, which any ocean rower or sailor or rower out there who appreciates aerodynamics and weight, it was like calamity, like with this massive like 15-kilo thing on the front of our boat. We obviously couldn't fit it because we're rubbish at that. So we had to pay this French dude next to us to fit it with us. We paid him in whiskey and cigarettes. He was a legend. And so it was just constantly like another problem. The oars were wrong, but it was too late to send them back. So we rowed an ocean with racing rowing oars, which essentially is like surfing a big wave on a wakeboard. It's like, it's just not, you just shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
So there was loads of problems, but I think we'd overcome so much in terms of raising the money and all the training. We were there and we knew we were going to leave at some point. The weather was terrible, so we were delayed by 12 days. And it was weird. I'm sure you had this before big games in your kind of rugby career. You go to bed with this sense of anticipation, and you almost psych yourself up before you go to bed. You eat right, you get the sleep, you wake up for this big game or this big moment. And we had that time and time again, and then the weather would be bad, so we'd have to delay it. So
we just kept carb loading and never actually left the harbour.
Yeah, like people are like, good luck, like you've left. It's like we're still at the buffet in the hotel. But it was a really strange time of just anticipation and then waiting. And finally we were like, you know what, the weather's going to be bad for another 2 weeks. It was like, let's just go. We were so ready to go and just give it a crack that we just set out off in the bad winds and weather. But it was a pretty strange time looking back on it.
And what was there's one bit, obviously I've heard you guys talk about this a few times, and there's always one quote from this bit of the journey that sticks out in my mind. It was about the kind of, what was the advice you were given as you left, or which way to go as you pulled out the what were you told?
Just the bloke on the pedalo as we left.
Well, no, so that was another one. I was thinking, what was it? Just get out of the harbour and turn left.
Right, yeah. We
didn't
know port or starboard at this point, which I think I still don't, to be honest. Which,
we played Caribbean, out the harbour, turn right.
Yeah.
Who was that bloke we met on the pedalo on the way out?
Yeah. So you get out, so you leave, you say you've gone through that part of it. And there's a lot of stuff that obviously, you know, I mean, how long are you out at sea for again? It was
54 days in
54
total.
days. So a lot happens in 54 days. But just give us, like, I don't know, the top 3 things that stick out in your minds from those 54 days in terms of, you know, a bit of adversity, kind of maybe like this moment of going, geez, we're actually, this is amazing, we can be in a better place, and then maybe something, you know, like a bit of a learning process.
Yeah, so we had, I guess, the initial excitement of leaving and all the adrenaline of like rowing away from land, which was kind of awesome, but obviously knackering at the same time. And then you get a day or so in, and then it all kind of catches up with you. And it's the first time we rode at night, which was like stressful, not seeing anything, trying to sleep on the boat with it getting smashed around in the waves. So the first kind of 2 weeks at sea were really, really tough, because you're going from it just being something that you've thought about and spoke about for 18 months to, right, now you're doing it. Your communication is pretty much cut off with the rest of the world. It's just the two of you. And you know, every question that people ask you, you know, what happens if there's massive waves? You're starting to like find the answers for those things. Or what happens if you get seasick? And I suffered with seasickness early on, like really badly. So then you're kind of in it. And once that initial like adrenaline dies down, it was really tough to get in we rode in shifts, so 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 24 hours a day until we got there. So whilst I was rowing, Tommy would be in the cabin, either sleeping or eating or stretching, essentially getting ready, crying for the next 2 hour shift. And that was how we worked. So although there was two of us on the boat, it's still quite a lonely trip, because you're rowing by yourself 95% of the time. So that process, I guess it's, how I can explain it, is like jet lag, like trying to get used to this new, like your body's trying to get used to this new system, and it was horrendous. We're like falling asleep on the oars, like in big surf, all this sort of stuff. And then that kind of 2 week period kind of culminated in like the worst case scenario, I guess the perceived worst case scenario of, in the middle of the night on the 12th night, we got completely capsized. So it's like 4:30 in the morning, I'm on the oars, Tom's in the cabin asleep, and we're kind of making really good progress, I guess, feeling like we're getting into it a little bit more now, perhaps, still scared of the dark, and these waves are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then all of a sudden this rogue one just comes up on our right and just completely barrels us. So, you know, it's what you dread for the whole 18 months, and one thing you never want to happen is being 500 miles away from the nearest land and completely barreled with, you know, you never want to test out that survival technique that we learned in a leisure centre in East London. And we were faced with that potentially being the case, and it was like, yeah, those 2 weeks, like all of a sudden it was like, right, this is us now, we better get used to life at sea. And this 2 weeks a bit like, whoa, these waves are crazy. It had to be like, right, this is what we are now. And actually coming out of that capsize was when we realised that a lot of things on this ocean, like, we can't control. Spent a lot of time afterwards, you know, we spent a lot of time before worrying about everything that could potentially happen, and then a bit of time afterwards, you know, what if we capsize again? And we kind of realised that nothing that we worry about is going to change that at all. We can only control our mindset. Yeah. So although that was a horrible thing to go through, it definitely changed the tone for us in how we dealt with some more unfortunate things that came our way. Yeah. What would the next thing be, Tom, do you reckon?
So it's funny, like, as you were explaining that, I think, like, we always refer to these big moments of the road. The capsize was one, the hurricane was the second, where we went through the first hurricane to form at that time of year for like the last 60 years. But actually, like, as you were saying that, there are so many small moments through those 54 days that don't get mentioned, which would equally as hard in terms of, like, as James said then, the waking up. So you're only ever getting 45 minutes sleep tops between shifts. You fall to sleep and then you're back up. You can't open your hands because they're kind of locked shut from the rowing. You've got no skin on your backside. You're soaking wet. It was just the monotony of that process was so draining. And for the first 1,500 miles of that row, we got over the capsize. We kind of crashed on after that, but we were still really struggling. We couldn't get into this rhythm, and then it took this forced 72 hours of, I'll say, rest. It wasn't really rest, but this hurricane kind of made its way into our path, and we went through it, and it was pretty interesting, obviously, because we were in a hurricane in a rowing boat, but it was the first time where we...
You say that so blasé, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
As if we were in there.
It wasn't normal. But, I mean, we stuck the iPad onto the roof of the cabin. We were watching rom-coms and Entourage, so it wasn't as bad as it seemed. For the first time, everything we were doing was to get from point A to point B. Barbados was our goal, and it was the first time that something had come in our way where not only couldn't we make any progress, but we got pushed back over 100 miles. And it was a huge, huge test of our relationship, of kind of our general motivation and mindset. And we went into that hurricane struggling. We came out of it genuinely two different people. Something in those 3 days changed. It's when we decided that we were going to take the Tempest Two full time. We wrote the worst business plan ever written by anyone in history. And we put that change down to something we're pretty firm believers in, that when you push yourself far enough outside your comfort zone for long enough, and we've done that to such an extreme degree, that's kind of where change and innovation and progress happens. And it was so steep for us. We came out of it just kind of with this unbelievable fire just to get to the other side. But also our bodies had adapted. We were now like remarkably fit. It's incredible what your body can do if you push the right buttons. And we went from struggling on the 2-hour shift to then doubling up for 10 hours during the day, only stopping for water and food, then going into nighttime shifts. And, you know, I think people don't realize that, you know, if you really want to progress, if you really, really want to excel at something, you have to be uncomfortable. And we've realized that the learning process relies on that if you just do the same thing over and over and over again, you'll just plateau. And I think golf is a perfect example. We've both played golf for 10 years. We haven't got any better in the last 7 because we just play the same courses and we just play the same shots and whatever. Whereas you need to practice the things that make you uncomfortable. And we were so uncomfortable on that row that we just became completely at home on the boat. And the physical and mental changes were genuinely pretty staggering after that hurricane.
So, I mean, yeah, it's if you said to people, yeah, you're going to go on this road, you want to get chucked out your boat, fully capsized in the middle of the night, that in itself is enough to kind of send shivers down your spine. But then to say you're also going to go through the only hurricane in the last 60 years to hit the Atlantic, you're going to be pushed back 100 miles, spend 72 hours not rowing, just hunkered down in the boat. They're two pretty big things. And from what you're saying, that, as you said, Tom, what actually came out of that was it narrowed your focus, it narrowed your way of thinking, and changed your mindset. So that one, James, you said around, you know, this way of thinking, this stoic way of thinking of, you know, at the end of the day, all you can do is control what you can control. And I think that's such a relevant thing, especially at the moment coming out of COVID and the pandemic. So many, and we've all been there, and we all spend and almost waste time and energy worrying about these things that actually we can have zero impact on. We can have zero material effect over changing. So it's actually going, okay, what within that then do we control? So as you said there, if you can't control if another wave comes and knocks you out, I suppose what you can control is how you react and deal with it. So going into the hurricane, undoubtedly that probably helped you going into the hurricane, already having kind of had that slight shift. And then to come out of it, as you say, that hurricane, that 72 hours, actually go, right, you know, that clarity of thought. So what would you say, because arguably in that situation where it's almost forced upon you, there's an argument to say, well, kind of you had two ways of going. You either go the way you went, or you go the other way, which is a pretty dark place. So for people that don't have that extreme setting to kind of have that thought process change, what would be your advice to people like that in terms of, you know, as you said, learning to actually create that next level of innovation and all that kind of stuff, and actually changing the mindset? How do people go about doing that?
I think it starts with like an awareness of that, which again, it is easier when you're faced with those two options, so to speak, or, you know, you're in a situation where, yeah, you either act positively or negative, and it only impacts yourself. And that awareness is the first step. And I think, I guess, although it was easier for us in the hurricane, it was kind of more obvious to us afterwards. And with everything that we've done following the Atlantic crossing. And I think one thing that, again, the Atlantic helps us with, and we try and say to people is bring some perspective to like a situation. That you know, it's very easy. I was the first to get really annoyed, you know, if I miss my train or I'm delayed, sat in traffic or something, to the point where I'll be like, it could ruin my day. And so in the big scheme of things, you know, what's the point? And I think what we've become quite good at is like zooming out from one small thing, like you said, that you can't have any control over, and like, you know, zooming out, seeing the bigger picture, because it makes that decision of, you know, going into a dark place or being positive much easier, I think. As soon as you can bring a bit of perspective to a situation, you know, COVID as an example, it's obviously not ideal by any stretch, but trying to bring some perspective to like the numbers and to, you know, the length of time and the potential opportunities that come out of it, make that decision to be more positive that bit easier, I think.
Yeah.
And
perspective's huge, as you say, in all of this.
Yeah, definitely. But I do think you're right. It is very obvious when you have one singular purpose. For us, it was getting to Barbados and rowing an ocean boat. And actually, in real life, you've got hundreds of different purposes or goals, or like at once. You know, you might have a family, you might have work pressures and financial pressures and stuff. And it is a bit of a plate spinning exercise, but just practicing that through like having awareness and perspective, I think, is the first step in kind of more consistently making that like positive choice.
Yeah, and it's nice to hear, because obviously with what we're doing with the 101st, that the whole premise is that actually the mindsets that allowed you guys to do what you've done, as you've just said there, are no different to what everyone could be using. It's just changing the context and applying it in a way that's bespoke to you. So you go through all that, you kind of come into Barbados, you're on it's on the horizon, you see land, you've got the last little stretch, which most people would assume would be a nice, easy breeze into the harbour, get in, pop champagne, all the rest of it. Unfortunately, as a lot of your 54 days, it wasn't as simple as that, was it?
It was horrendous, actually. So, like, if you can imagine, for 54 days, the only thing we're looking at is this tiny little speedometer, essentially, that's got our speed, it's got our direction, and it's got basically our distance on a countdown from 3,000. And I remember we were watching it during a night shift, and it got to 99. So we broke through 100, and it was like, right, we now know we're probably a day and a half away due to our, you know, we're usually doing 60, 70 miles a day on a good day. So like, that's when it was like, oh my God, it's actually going to happen. And James saw a glow over my shoulder, which was Barbados at night. And, you know, it was an amazing feeling. And then suddenly we were probably about 20 miles away from land. It was still the middle of the night. And I was on the oars, and I kind of looking at the speedometer and our compass. And I shouted to Whittle, who was asleep. I was like, mate, come and check this out. We're moving at about 3 knots, dead north. And we're obviously wanting to go west to Barbados. And we were sat there, and it was like, what the hell is going on? Checked our kind of GPS. Yeah, we're going dead north at 3 knots, which is pretty quick. And it was suddenly like, no matter how much we rode, we were just going up. And basically the kind of the currents in the Atlantic go like that, kind of clockwise. They take you up to the Americas and over the North Atlantic back to kind of the UK and Europe. And it was suddenly like, crap, we're going to miss Barbados here. Because as soon as you get sucked into it, you can't get down. So we called this guy who we'd been given a number of, who was going to come and meet us on a fishing boat to guide us through the reefs in a few hours' time. Middle of the night, and he's like, hello. And he's like, hiya, James and Tom here. Like, haven't spoken to you yet. It's a bit weird, but we're being dragged north. Like, what do we do? And he's like, right, okay, there's basically a 1 kilometre channel that you're in at the moment, which is that current that goes straight up. You need to basically bust your ass to get out of it before it drags you too far north. So it's absolute panic stations. We're both on the oars, then like the rudder falls off, so we're in the water trying to get the rudder back on. Eventually got through it, thankfully. Started getting guided through these reefs. The wind was offshore. We're both on the oars for 6 hours doing the last like 2 kilometers, doing like less than 0.1 knots. It was like an absolute slog. And then we like rounded the harbour wall into Port St. Charles. And that was like this moment of like, right, okay, like this is the moment that's been playing out in our head for 54 days. And it was ego driven for sure. It was like, this is the moment we're going to show everyone that we can do it. Come round the harbour into the yacht club, like everyone's come out of the restaurants with our family and friends, clapping us in. This big super yacht called Slipstream, they were sounding the horn, all their crews on the deck, and it was like, we are legends. Like, this is it. Like, we're legends. And our egos were inflated due to all this attention. And we came around the front of this big super yacht, and we must have been 5 or 6 meters away from the jetty where we were finishing. And we cut that corner pretty fine. And these big super yachts got these big angular anchor chains. And we went over an anchor chain, and it snagged on our rudder. And we'd rowed 3,000 miles, and we got stuck about 5.5 meters away from the finish line. To the point I had to jump in, untangle it, swim it back. This took like 15 minutes. Everyone had now gone back to their lunch. And it was just like our mums stood on the jetty with some flat champagne. And it was the biggest anticlimax you could, it was like, well done. It was like, oh my God.
So embarrassing.
But like, it summed up the trip perfectly. I don't think I can change it. But that moment where we touched land, it was just such a mixture of emotions, just relief and just disbelief, essentially, that we'd actually managed it. And it was an incredible moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these ones where, as you say, only 1,000 odd people have even done it. So you're in a very tight little club there, and obviously we spent the most of the time talking about the Atlantic because it was your first one, and we're going to talk about some of the other ones now. But if you were both going to pick one kind of learning from that entire process, from sending the text when you've had a beer to then landing in Barbados, and that, as you say, that almost pure elation and relief and jubilation that you'd done it. Within all of that, and it's quite a tough question, what would be your one kind of learning that you've got, or the biggest change you went through during that whole period?
Yeah, I think for me it probably changes, to be honest, but for now, quite obviously, it's about like trusting the process, and in that, like the small things, and like the power of like the tiny little habits or routines or whatever it is that, by themselves seem so minuscule and irrelevant, but actually compounded over a period of time make a huge difference. And for us, again, on the road, it's quite an obvious example because we've got a 2-month, section of our lives where there's some really small things that we did consistently actually had a huge impact. And one of them would be, we were dragging a rope behind us for 1,500 miles just without knowing, a docking rope. And it was probably maybe 2 foot of it was in the water. And when we jumped in to clean the boat, we noticed it, pulled it back on board and kind of hooked it up, and spoke to our land support and said, we've been dragging the docking rope, since we left. And they were like, oh, yeah, no worries. That would have been causing, 0.1, 0.2 knots of drag. Not a big deal, but just so you know, you've added a day and a half onto your arrival time because of that. Yeah. And something that's so, so small, but actually that's 24 hours a day for 1,500 miles makes a massive, massive difference. And the same with when we like stop and cross paths, we might have a chat or be a bit lazy, like keeping the oars in the water and keeping the boat moving. And again, doing it once is fine, it's no issue, but we're changing shifts, 6 times a day for 54 days. That could end up being, 10 hours worth of faffing around where you could be making progress. And we kind of always translate it to the workplace in the form of meetings. Group meetings happen all the time. And there's always that one person who's, a minute late or 2 minutes late, say, and you can have a meeting with 10 people. So that's 20 minutes of time totally wasted. If that's a weekly meeting over a year, you've lost a few days worth of work. And that's just one group. Those like small things that can make a massive difference over a period of time. And it was just really obvious throughout the Atlantic Row. And again, something that we kind of kept with us as we moved on to next adventures was like, try and prioritize these small things that are very easy to let drop off. And we'll like feel the benefit from kind of keeping doing them.
Perfect. So what are you, Tommy?
Yeah, I think the most profound kind of learning I think was simply actually realizing what we were capable of. There's no kind of hiding the fact that when we went into this, we were like total novices, both in mindset, but also kind of skill set and physicality. And I think that the biggest change, we obviously learned a lot about the sea and we picked up some skills about rowing, but the biggest change was when we kind of hit Barbados was, I think we filtered it down to its simplest sense that we'd essentially removed the word can't from our vocabulary, which sounds very simple and not very kind of technical, but it's the biggest thing you can do to allow yourself to go and achieve things in the future. And, you know, for us, it took rowing an ocean, but it's a very extreme example. But I think what we've learned is if you want to really kind of develop yourself and become kind of the best version of yourself, you've just got to keep doing big things that essentially scare you. But the Atlantic just gave us that confidence that, you know what, if we can go and do that, if we can raise the money, if we can put ourselves in a boat for 2 months, if we can overcome hurricanes and capsizes and tankers, then there really isn't a limit on what we can go and achieve if we kind of apply that mindset. And we're such firm believers in that. And I think for us, what the Atlantic started as an ego thing, there's no denying that. We wanted to prove to ourselves and each other and other people that we could go and do it. But now what we're passionate about is if one person can see what we've done through these adventures and go, do you know what, if those two guys can do that, then why am I putting off this? Why am I putting off starting that business or running that marathon or doing this or whatever it is? Then that for us is so fulfilling, that it's such a privilege to be able to open people's eyes to that, because anyone could go and do what we do, genuinely. They just need that. They need that Atlantic to show themselves that, you know what, with this way of thinking, I can open any door I want to open and walk through it. And that for us, that's why I think the Atlantic will always be kind of our precious adventure. It was our first one. It was the first time we actually realized what we were capable of. And it's led us on this crazy journey over the last 4 years. And I think we'll always look back on it fondly due to that.